Hello. Our story begins in the caves of a mountain range outside of Luke's empty Jedi temple on Ossus. He had contacted his twin sister, Leia, asking that she come by to help him. It would be a little difficult, being that Leia was struggling with fighting off the demilitarization bills forwarded by Chancellor Mon Mothma, but she had the chance to come out here to visit her brother. She was accompanied by Han and Ben, but they were currently down at the base of the temple itself, hanging around with Luke's found friend, Lor Santaka. The Jedi in training, and the Jedi no longer in training, explored these abandoned caverns. Luke brought his sister out here because she had found a text from the planet of Lothal. There were some images that correlated with what Luke found here. He was hoping that Leia could piece them together for him. She placed her hand against the wall, holding her former lightsaber ignited over the text she had once given over to her brother. As she scanned the pages, she pointed at the wall and quietly addressed the issue that was the hand placement. Using the Force, brother and sister pressed their hands against said wall and it began to shift. Slowly, a stiff and unmoving mural turned into an animated piece of art, transforming up until it sucked them into a dimension between space and time. They were confused, but very quickly, after turning back to the notes and translating what had been read, they realized where they were. Luke mentioned that Ahsoka had been to a place like this before, and Leia nodded, believing that this was the same realm where Bridger saved Ahsoka from. They continued through, discussing what they understood about the world between worlds, and how they could effectively use it without destroying the fabric of time and space in the process of trying to right some wrongs. There were voices inside this realm, some of those before their time, others from beyond their time. They heard whispers of Snoke and Kylo Ren, but had no clue if these voices that they did not understand were before or after they had entered the dimension. After walking around for a little while, they found a portal that showed their mother. They had, by this point, become familiar with who Padme was. Her appearance was recognizable to them, and they didn't have any issues understanding that this was her moments before her death. She had given birth to her children. She was suffering, and Luke, upon instinct, like Ezra, reached out and pulled her through. Leia panicked, knowing that this could forever change everything. Padme was in pain, but it wasn't describable pain. It was the loss of something she couldn't ever replace. But as she was brought into this new world, the one between worlds, she thought that she had transcended into the afterlife. Except when she looked up, she found herself even more confused. The two adults, both of which older than her at this point, looked down at her, and looked so familiar upon first interaction. In a fashion similar to her first interaction with Anakin, she asked if they were angels. The twins looked to each other as Leia set down the book she had been reading during their walk and pressed her hand gently against her mother's wrist. She could feel the pain, and Leia nodded to her brother, so he replicated her actions. They didn't fully transfer life essence into their mother, but they did the spiritual version of a Force heal. It was information Leia had found inside the Jedi textbooks her brother discovered in his studies. Force heal was something she hoped she could teach her son someday. Regardless, this little bit of a boost gave Padme a shock of life, one taking her from death's doorsteps to trying to understand where she was and what was happening. The twins got her up and explained as much as they could to her, but of course, they couldn't just tell her that they were her children. That would take time. Padme knew something was up, but she couldn't really put her finger on it. They would get her out of the world between worlds and bring her back to Luke's temple, where they would try to explain everything to her the way they wanted to originally. These several conversations that would transpire would be very jarring for Padme. She was given information softly. Not everything was immediate. Truthfully, most of these conversations started off slowly. They would explain to her that she was brought back to life through the Force, and it was about 29 years after she had passed on and was supposed to be dead. Things like the rise of the Empire, the fall of the Jedi and the Republic, the destruction of Alderaan, and the death of her friends and husband, not to mention countless other atrocities, would have to be covered. It was daunting for Luke and Leia, because despite them having lived through all of these events, actually rehashing them and telling someone who had no clue they ever happened was a bit challenging. Though the most painful thing for Padme to hear was that the two people who saved her were her children. It wasn't her husband, her friends, or the Jedi. Well, not technically Jedi, but the people she gave birth to. And yes, they were 4 years older than she was, which was a bit weird. But Padme should have been 29 years older at this point, like their father should have. Padme tried to be understanding, and she was for the most part, but Luke and Leia made this process as seamless as they possibly could for her. Of course, naturally, Padme was a bit rejecting of the idea that her children were right in front of her, but they had everything they needed. Luke and Leia had to withhold their own emotions of wanting to hug their actual mother, because they knew how scary everything was for her. But Padme handled everything pretty well, all things considered. She would, after about a week of talking, finally come around to where her children were in their individual lives, and be greatly understanding of everything they went through. Padme would need time to truly be able to express herself because everything she had gone through before the switch of times had been so mentally draining and tormenting, but she promised that she would make an effort to be the parent she wasn't able to be. Luke and Leia did make sure it was as clear as possible that they held nothing against their mother for not being present for them. They knew she would have never chosen it this way. As an added note, Luke and Leia had come to accept the same terms that Ahsoka had. Some people could not be removed from the world between worlds without upsetting the cosmic balance of everything. Anakin was one of those people, which is why they could not go back and save their father. He would disrupt the entire timeline, whereas Padme, they pulled her from where she was about to die. Her position in their timeline couldn't change or disrupt anything, which is why it was okay for them to bring her back, unlike their father. Despite the trauma of going through such a rapid change in seconds, Padme could see the silver lining in all of it. Her 5-year-old grandson was just adorable. Leia had a good choice in a husband, and her son, Luke, was so much like his father. It wasn't hard for her to acclimate to these revelations, but of course for Padme she couldn't just sit still. She needed to know how everything was going on inside the capital of this new republic. By the time she was ready, she was calling her children, son and daughter, and she was giving hugs to them with a jubilant smile on her face. Leia would escort her mother back to the capital, so that they could meet with Chancellor Mothma. This initially had Padme super excited. Mon Mothma survived a purge of the Senate and the galaxy. This was terrific news. But not everything initially was what she had hoped it would be. When Padme, Leia, and Mon met, Padme could see how much the war had worn on her longtime friend. Obviously, age was natural and Mon had aged like fine wine, but her commitment to peace was still strong, yet oddly misguided. Padme was super new to everything, but there was a noticeable tension between her daughter and her friend. Nothing hostile, but there were disagreements that they wanted to discuss, but were withholding because having Padme back was more important, in their minds, than competing for agreement from the once incredibly prestigious Old Republic senator. Their talk went well, and Padme was excited to spend more time around Mon and potentially even earn her spot back within the New Republic Senate. Obviously, the challenge for Padme would be becoming a senator again, but Leia suggested going under a completely different alias to hide her identity. She would look like herself, but as was shown by individuals serving the New Republic Senate, like Senator Hamato Ziono, people were incredibly fickle. It wasn't hard to imagine that people wouldn't look back more than 20 years to see that she was someone who had apparently died. The era of the Empire had done a number on the people of the galaxy, and Leia explained everything in much more detail to her mother. Leia told Padme about everything after Endor. The rebellion renamed itself into the New Republic, and they continued fighting against the Empire. Here on Coruscant, the people rebelled and the entire system turned into a full-blown civil war. Mas Amedda, the vizier of the Empire, who was currently the head of the provisional government on Coruscant, led the opposition. He stood with the Empire, who did not stand with him. Admiral Gallius Rex led the Imperial fleet away, and both Imperial remnants and New Republic converged on Jakku, the location of the final battle of the war. She expressed that in the middle, Mon Mothma, the New Republic, and the Empire had agreed to demilitarization. In theory, one that Leia announced she disagreed with, the idea was that they would defeat the Empire, force the Imperial sect to demolish and reconfigure their warships and weapons of mass destruction. Following this, the New Republic would commission patrolling vessels, ships that weren't really meant for war, and then they would take down what was the established Alliance fleet. Padme understood the sentiment. As a senator of the Old Republic, she knew that in an era of which she was from, the Republic also demilitarized. She referenced something called the Rusan Reformation, which Leia was more than familiar with, thanks to Bail. In Leia's mind, it seemed like these cycles were kind of perpetuating. Without a military, Mon Mothma believed it would encourage former Imperial individuals to cease hostility. Even more than that, Mon believed, as well as those pushing for demilitarization, that they needed to avoid the same circumstances leading to Palpatine's rise. Padme wanted to understand fully both sides of the argument, and so they were given. Those on the side of Mon Mothma believed that a standing army wasn't necessary. The funding for it would be overwhelming in the struggling beginning to democracy, and of course budget spending. On top of that, there were worries that having such a large military could encourage the rise of tyranny in a peaceful time. The main fear was Palpatine. The galaxy had come to resent his rule, and while there were Imperial loyalists, it was important to remember how deep his manipulation went. 2 entire generations saw him as the liberator of the Republic, and that needed to be corrected. On the other side, those viewing it as Leia did, believed that a standing military was a temporary need. Padme listened, being that she had stood against the rise of the Military Creation Act of 22 BBY, almost costing her life on multiple occasions. Leia believed that they needed to fund their military, despite the risks it would have and even pressure it would put on the annual galactic budget, because the threat of the Empire still loomed in her mind. Before saving Padme, Leia had to bail Hera Syndulla out of a potential court-martialing, because there were rumors of an Imperial Grand Admiral returning, one who was a mastermind behind the Empire's strength. Padme asked for the committee's rationale behind their frustrations with this General Hera Syndulla, Padme assuming it was the daughter or granddaughter of Cham Syndulla, the Clone War general. But Leia told her that Hera broke protocol because a Jedi named Ahsoka Tano was lost on Satos, and a whole other thing leading to intergalactic travel and the return of Ezra Bridger and apparently Thrawn. Padme asked about Ahsoka, recognizing that name immediately, and Leia didn't know. She thanked her daughter and would sleep on this information inside of the apartment her senator daughter currently held. This left Padme with more questions than answers, and even more than that, the desire to do the right thing. She sided with her daughter though, kind of. This was different from the build-up to the Clone Wars. Militarizing against the Separatists would be showing that they welcomed the prospect of war. But in this scenario, while Mon Mothma was ethically right, the prospect of an empire just going away seemed a little odd. The worst part is, it really did go away. The remnant vanished into the unknown regions, and politicians couldn't react to something that simply didn't exist in the public eye. Privately, like Mon had with Hera, there were fears of Thrawn's return and more, but in the public eye they couldn't just speculate on what-ifs. That wouldn't get them into re-election, and that certainly wouldn't help them fund projects, especially one like an entire military. In the following months, Padme would be able to establish herself on Naboo, where she would see her family, especially her sister, Sola, with gray hairs and her children all grown up. Padme would decide to run for election on her home world, and like she had before, she would win. In the time before her victory, Padme and Mon would talk about their opinions on the state of the galaxy, but the Chancellor stood her ground. They needed concrete proof of a legitimate threat. The constant thing that Mon kept telling her friend was that the galaxy had changed. Corporations no longer ran their democracy. It was at the whims of the people in power, which somehow could be just as bad. Padme began seeing the cracks in the foundation. As an outsider and as someone so new to this world, it was clear. But her movements inside the New Republic Senate would also go unnoticed. In an era of Palpatine, before the Clone Wars, young vibrancy was desired. Padme, despite being the opposition to him, had the youthfulness that many did not have. Her eagerness to do right by the citizens was desirable, but now, everyone who ran for office had the same campaigning slogans as Padme had 30 years before. So much of what made her special in the age of the Old Republic made her just another face in the crowd during the New Republic. The biggest difference was, Padme wasn't as corruptible. So many of these senators never had a true voice with an empire ran by Palpatine, and anyone new to the table just followed the established leaders. So constituents and voters saw their elected officials get office and then slowly turn their backs on them. The big difference was, it was done without corporate greed. Democracy was fickle, and Padme needed to come up with a new idea to counter this rise in complacency, before something truly horrific happened. Under the identity of Sabine Nibiru, Padme was able to motion for movements inside the Galactic Senate. The issue continued to remain for the years that followed. Not many people listened. She and Leia were able to create a caucus and were able to rally people and senators to their points, but something else needed to be done. Away from the political spectrum, Padme spent a lot of time with her family. While the potential of remarrying was possible, she never went for it. She was comfortable with who and what she had. Due to Leia working off of Chandrilia and keeping a similar schedule to her mother, they were able to spend much more time together. At this point, Luke's order didn't have any students, so they were able to spend time together as well. It was a little happy family and Padme adored it. Despite the twins being all grown up, Padme would have the distinct pleasure of being around for little Ben Solo, and she learned he was named after her friend Obi-Wan. Even though Leia grew up with a strong emotional support around her and a strong family unit with the Organas, she never let her desire to always be around her real, biological mother deter her from her work. Leia had a lot of issues to work through regarding Anakin, and Padme would make that much easier. Due to them working on the same bills together, they were able to naturally be around the other, which meant those needs for Padme and Leia were met. What they were able to accomplish was quite large in due time. Politically, the New Republic slowed down its pursuit of demilitarization because of the work done by Padme and Leia. Though the worst thing had been associated with their caucus, it was seen as fear-mongering, when in reality, they were proposing a sound strategy to resist oppression. They were able to cite the rise of Imperial-related outbursts in the workplace, in urban environments, and even in non-Republic territory. Leia and Padme believed that this was a sign of the Empire's return. Its influence still stuck with people, and while this was agreed upon within the Senate, they couldn't really use it as evidence to continue manufacturing warships, let alone maintain the ones not decommissioned in the Disarmament Act of 4 ABY. The biggest threat was in Arquentans, if that. Not even Star Destroyers appeared during these incidents. In 15 ABY, young Ben Solo was 9 years old, the same age his grandfather was when he joined the Jedi Order. Grandma Amidala joined the family when they dropped off the young and excited Jedi. It was so interesting for Padme. She could see the parallels immediately, but she was excited. Her son Luke brought together a group of 10 to 12 Jedi, including Ben, to begin a training temple. He had found artifacts along the way, with Lor San Taka and so on. It was a good setup for the Jedi Master, and Grand Master of the New Order. Because Padme could see the similarities between her late husband and her grandson, she told him to feel free to reach out to her whenever he needed to. He didn't think much of this, but he was grateful, telling her that he would, as he said goodbye to his parents and his grandmother. The following years after 15 ABY would be pretty seamless. Padme would retain her role inside the Galactic Senate, and the remnant of the Empire would finally be vanquished, thanks to a treaty made by Admiral Paleon. Publicly, there weren't many true conflicts, and the Senate continued to drag their feet on the demilitarization side of their treaty. Padme had weaned more individuals into her caucus. While nowhere near as large as a delegation of 2,000, Padme finally created a strong resistance against the destruction of the New Republic military. The New Republic cruisers, introduced around 9 ABY, weren't true military vessels. They were good for maintaining balance, but if they ever crossed paths with an ISD, a patrol of those would get steamrolled. Ironically, that was the point. Their sleek design was like any member of the Alliance fleet, rounder and less menacing, which meant equipped with less weapons. These vessels were approved for more production, which wasn't really what Leia and Padme wanted, but at the moment, that was more than enough. By the time 23 ABY came around, there was trouble in the water. Not only did Luke and Lando have an encounter with the Sith 3 years before, but the New Republic Senate was struggling. The government had moved from 3 rotating locations to certifiably staying on Hosnian Prime. There would be a statue erected for Senator Bail Organa, and by this point, Chancellor Mon Mothma had stepped down from her role, allowing the mantle to be passed on. Leia and Padme's populist movement, which supported more sovereignty for each individual system, struggled with the likes of the centrists that wanted to enlarge the government and also expand the military. The issue Padme and Leia were having was the expansiveness of the government. It could lead to a Palpatine-like regime, and their desire for larger military was in alignment with what they wanted, but it was almost too far. There was hope that they could slow it down, but there was a lot of hostility growing between the parties of the New Republic, grinding the entire government into a state of almost gridlock. Leia confessed to her mother that she considered resigning, and Padme talked her out of it. If Leia resigned, they could lose all their strength. They needed to unite. During the Old Republic, their strength never came from their numbers but their voices. This was the turning point right here. With Mothma out of the government, the galaxy needed strong voices to maintain the drive for sovereignty. but also military expansion. This was helpful to Leia, but there was more trouble brewing on the horizon. It would be revealed that Darth Vader was Leia and Luke's father, and that completely disrupted the status quo for Senator Solo Organa. She was ousted from power almost immediately. This left Padme alone in the Senate, to face what felt like a crumbling movement. No one was able to connect her back to Darth Vader or her to Anakin. With Leia being out of contention in the Senate, she focused on building up another military movement, one being titled the Resistance. She and her mother had spoken about it, but Padme at this point started to dissuade Leia from doing that. If she created a rebellion, it would cause the centrist movement to continue growing, forcing the populace out and creating another scenario like what they had with Palpatine. She knew that he wasn't around anymore, so their concern truly was corruption. Leia took her mother's advice and reeled it in. Instead of creating this resistance, she spent time with Han on Chandrilia, and there would be cause for concern with Ben. Padme knew it would come. If he was like his grandfather, which he was, he would find a lure in the secrets he wasn't told about. The identity of his grandfather came with the public recognition in who Vader was. Han, Leia, and Luke wanted to keep it a secret because they didn't want Ben to feel like he was connected to a monster like Vader. While Anakin was a different story, Ben felt betrayed by this, mostly by his parents. Padme brought Ben off of Ossus and spoke with him about it inside of her family's villa on Naboo. This talk would be the nail in the coffin for Snoke's plans to seduce Ben to the dark side. Because Padme knew the real Anakin Skywalker before he became Vader, she was able to show Ben and tell him what it did to Anakin, how the dark side took something so precious and deceived it until self-destruction. She told him about Palpatine and his tactics and everything she knew. For the 18-year-old Ben Solo, this information was incredibly important, and he held it close to his heart, avoiding the presence of Snoke from this point forward, fearing its relation to how Anakin fell. However, he avoided telling his uncle, hoping that by ignoring it, it would go away. As the New Republic continued to evolve, they moved past their cruisers and decided to upgrade to a more structured fleet. The tragedy is, despite Padme's voice still standing strong on the populist side of things, which still wasn't even considered a real party, the creation of this military was exactly for the same reason the Old Republic wanted to pass the Military Creation Act. There were fears of hostility growing, and so as a means to prevent true civil war breaking out between the New Republic and its parties, Padme and Leia got what they wanted, just not the way they wanted it. A fleet of the New Republic was commissioned using the former Dawn of Tranquility MC-85 cruiser as a baseline model. It was more up-to-date than the MC-80 Home 1 type, which would be better for the Republic. It was a tragedy. While Padme's caucus continued to grow, even despite her daughter being revealed to be related to Vader, Padme's political career was never impacted by this. But there was a rise of a splinter group in the unknown regions. It started to become more apparent towards the end of the ABY-20s. The First Order only seemed like what the pieces of the Imperial Remnant were, a loyalist to the Empire that didn't want a full-blown conflict. But in a way, similar to the conflict between the Separatists and the Old Republic, the First Order and New Republic entered a Cold War, not to mention the tension already existing within the Senate. There wasn't any initial combat because it was Cold War, but because Leia was the former leader of the Defense Council, she was promoted by her mother to acting general for the New Republic military, aside her longtime allies in Admiral Akbar, Vice Admiral Holdo, and General Syndulla. With the Jedi Order remaining strong in the years since Ben's initial run-in with Snoke, they remained quiet, watching over the tensions that continued to grow. In 31 ABY, Ben Solo would have an interaction with the Knights of Ren, and along with his first student, a Zygerian Padawan, he would cut down each of the members of the Darkside cult. His finesse and mastery of the blade rivaled that of his own master, or as he, like Anakin used to joke with Obi-Wan, Ben would say, he did to Luke. The interaction with the Knights of Ren wasn't very concerning for Ben. He and Luke had come across them before. The only reason Ben acted with hostility was because they did first. His student and him would return to Ossus to report the incident. 3 years following the destruction of the Knights of Ren, the First Order would make its first strike. There would be an attack, one that would completely cripple the New Republic and destroy the Hosnian system. While the Senate by this point was finally making its return, thanks to members of Padme's caucus, the First Order, using the extremely powerful Starkiller base, would stomp out governmental power in the galaxy. This, of course, thanks to the Centrists gaining so much influence in the years since Leia's resignation. Under the centrist New Republic, the galaxy became big government focused, but the benefit of this was the New Republic Navy, which sprung into action. While Leia and Luke were completely unaware of the status of their mother, Leia had been quietly building a group of her own freedom fighters in the shadow of the construction of the New Republic military. Leia's miniature resistance was located on Dakar, and a group of fighters led by the son of rebel fighter hero Shara Bey would make their way to Starkiller. In the meantime, Admiral Ackbar, who was also off-world, would redirect part of his fleet to Dakar so that they could rally reinforcements and get Leia off-planet. Luke and his Jedi would move from Ossus to Hosnian Prime to see if they could find any survivors. Tragically, they wouldn't. The initial strike at Starkiller would be slow, but a covert mission led by Han, Chewie, and infamous identity theft Ezra Bridger would shut down the shields on the superweapon. When they got back to the air with the Falcon, they were able to help Poe Dameron's pilots destroy the superstation before returning to Dakar for more excitement. Side note, because Luke was never lost, Poe was never sent to Jakku to meet with Lor San Tekka for the map to Luke Skywalker, meaning that Finn never had his moment of realization due to Jakku being his first mission. Rey would also still be scavenging on Jakku because BB-8 would never find his way to her. With the New Republic fleet pulling up to Dakar, they were surprised when the First Order readily prepared for the second battle. Due to all the influence in the galaxy being destroyed at Hosnian, Snoke realized that they needed to strike now. The First Order in this timeline was small by comparison to the New Republic, even after Hosnian, but the main First Order fleet was still with Supreme Leader Snoke. General Hux's unit of 3 Resurgent Star Destroyers and a Mandator 4 class Dreadnought prepared for combat. Hux was gunning for easy kills, and if he could kill Leia on Dakar, that was a victory. Instead, when Captain Kennedy fired on the base, it was destroyed with no casualties. With the full support of a proper Republic Navy, Poe Dameron led another assault, this time with MG-100 Star Fortress heavy bombers from the Raddus, Admiral Ackbar's flagship. These bombers had been around since the days of the Alliance, aiding with cracking Imperial holdouts open. Their longtime success was why they found implementation here. Thanks to the support of a proper fleet, Poe's fighters would make an assault on the Dreadnought, as Kennedy's TIEs tried to make a counter. With the Millennium Falcon running cover fire for the New Republic fighters, it was nearly impossible for the First Order. As the fighter assault over the Dreadnought heated up, Ackbar moved the fleet into combat positions against the 3 Star Destroyers. They were taking a huge risk here. Maybe not a necessary one, but they needed to win this battle. The SF-17 bombers hit their targets, and they were able to obliterate the Dreadnought by the time the fleets converged on each other. With the Star Fortresses retreating to their hangar bays, the New Republic fighter force and fleet pushed up against the remaining First Order ships, and laid their heavy cannons into them. While the MC-85s weren't as powerful as the Resurgents, they outnumbered the First Order, and Ackbar's strategy was much more equipped for this skirmish than General Hux was, which ended up being Hux's downfall. Outside the asteroid belt that was now Hosnian Prime, Luke boarded an old Corellian battlecruiser. When he got in, he saw his mother and gave her a huge hug. He told her that he was glad to see that she was alright, and she was happy he was here. Like Senator Xiono, she was off-world coincidentally when this happened. She immediately went in to save whoever was lost, unlike Xiono. Padme gave her grandson a big hug too, as they quickly got back to work trying to see if there was anyone that could be saved from the terror of the Hosnian cataclysm. With the defeat of the First Order over Dakar, Snoke pulled his forces back into hiding. He was unbelievably disappointed in their attack. He was hopeful that the Dreadnought could accomplish victory over Leia and her forces. Despite Hosnian being gone, the militarized New Republic was able to at the very least emerge with 2 victories back to back. Starkiller's destruction and the victory over Dakar would be rallying signs for the people of the galaxy. While it wouldn't be nearly as inspiring as a final stand that could have happened on Crate, it would have to suffice for the people of the galaxy. Padme would eventually reconvene with her daughter, but for the next year, the senator from Naboo would spend all her time gathering up the various star systems on Chandrilia to rebuild the New Republic. So much bickering and so much potential were lost in the Hosnian cataclysm. It was such a shock, but maybe it was for the right reasons. Maybe they could use the terrible loss of life to build back a better and stronger government. But now, they needed to focus on war, something Padme didn't want to do. Though this for Amidala was much different than the Confederacy uprising. During the Clone Wars, she called for peace, because the CIS wasn't authoritarian like the Empire. It positioned itself as a legitimate government, even though it kind of wasn't. This empire, this remnant, this First Order, was not that. They were a group of power-hungry insurgents willing to destroy entire systems of power to gain their own, and they had to be stopped. The following year would be a continuous grudge match. The New Republic, led by Leia and Han, would dive into the unknown regions to help. In a mission where Ben's student was almost killed, he decided to stay on Ossus until the conflict was over, becoming the interim instructor for all the Jedi until Luke returned. Lord Santaka had been that individual while Ben and his uncle were away. The New Republic fleet continued to grow on Corellia, Coruscant, Kuat, and Mon Calamari, while the smaller shipyard on Molinist created support ships for their fighter fleet. When the real conflict began again, it wasn't just the First Order but a splinter group called the Final Order. With the New Republic completely militarizing under a joint government led by Saba Nabiri, they were prepared. However, when the Emperor of an era long gone returned, terror struck the people of the galaxy. But there was a slight issue for said Emperor. His First Order, even without Snoke, wasn't going to side with him. Palpatine attempted to form an alliance, but Snoke, with his own individualism, avoided such a truce and targeted the Final Order. Unluckily for him, Palpatine was tired of being patient. Thanks to Luke and Lando's connection to the case due to Ochia Bestoon and their trail trying to find the girl he was after, they returned to Pisana to pick up their hunt, searching everywhere until they eventually accidentally found the Sith dagger. In the meantime, as they were moving from Pisana to Kaf Bir, to where the Emperor's throne room was, conflict was raging across the galaxy. With time to release their fleet, the Final Order started slowly but surely deploying, which forced the New Republic and First Order to fight back. For the First Order, if these Sith vessels destroyed the galaxy, then what galaxy would there be for them to conquer and rule if nothing was left? The conflict was messy and very unorganized. It came from more than just fleets but the people. As Padme heard herself, Shmi had always said the problem with the galaxy was people never helped each other out. Now they were. Not just navies, but entire groupings of resistance fighters. Without Crate, their numbers weren't as vast, but they were inspired with the resolve following Dakar. The battles between Final and First Orders were gritty, while the New Republic ran panic operations. Their entire goal was to save planets. As these continued to escalate, Lando and Luke found their way to Exegol inside of the Lady Luck, before transmitting the location of Exegol and their route to General Organa's fleet, which would make its way to the Sith planet. While the Final Order had been deploying their Zyston-class destroyers, a good number of them were still present at Exegol, so a fighting force scrounged up of rebels, resistance fighters, New Republic fighters, and people came into the system. It was a much smaller conflict than it would have originally been, but that was because the real battle was transpiring outside the planet. While it seemed prudent to go to the surface and kill Palpatine, they decided to orbital bombard the Sith Temple, killing the cultist and their Emperor in the process. Han and Chewie led the fighter assault, with Wedge, Shara, and Lando following behind them. Outside of Coruscant, Poe Dameron and his crew led a counter-assault on the 3 Zystons that approached the Ecumenopolis, and with a close scare, the New Republic was able to win the battle. The scare came when Vice Admiral Hodo, the leader of the Coruscant Defense Fleet, evacuated her MC-85 and moved her flagship in front of a planet-killing blast, saving Coruscant but sacrificing herself in the process. She would be remembered for her heroism, as it would be the sacrifice that completely saved the heart of the galaxy from complete destruction. Following the battles of Coruscant, Exegol, and multiple others, the people would rally together once more. They had finally, truly defeated evil. Perhaps the cure to all their problems had been the lack of togetherness. This was their chance to right those wrongs and make a new order, one that could maintain sovereignty without buckling too much to internal power. And truthfully, part of this was because of the Hosnian cataclysm. Had it not happened, many of the long-time power holders in the galaxy would vanish. Many those inside the former New Republic government were like Senator Hamata Ziono, individuals who neutrally watched the Galactic Civil War and did nothing until there was a chance for power for themselves. Now that most of those people were dead, maybe the New Republic stood a chance. Padme would be integral to this rebirth, but unlike her friend Mon, who had by this point passed away, she would commit herself to the role of rebuilding for 8 years. She would give it her all and eventually stop so that she could retire. Padme's work, alongside that, which was aided by her daughter, would see the galaxy heal under the strength of a government not affected by those left behind in the Imperial era. The Jedi Order under Luke would continue to grow. His first generation of Jedi had all passed their trials and become masters and knights. Now they were training their own students as they continued to expand their order outwards. It was through this expansion that Ben would run into someone he felt like he had known his entire life. A scavenger turned smuggler, one looking for her parents, the ones who abandoned her on Jakku. Rey would find her way to joining Luke's Jedi Order, after having a life of loneliness outside the junkyard of scraps that held the remnant of the old Empire. While Ben and Luke would follow the traditional aspects of the Jedi Order, the Skywalker Organa Solo family would remain strong. Padme, luckily for herself, wouldn't outlive her children, but their entire family, despite its dreary start, would find peace and happiness in a galaxy completely retrofitted for the better. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fat Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Gallivant Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sirwelm1767, Darth Revan, Granity Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewoo670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Save the Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Young Lisa 66, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, 46 Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the many 3 first names, Darkscene46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So, I really wanted to do this story because I've been really wanting to learn about the New Republic politics, and it's kind of similar in a way to the post-revolution America, where the standing military was decommissioned after we won the revolution. And so it's cool kind of seeing those parallels with the United States history and the New Republic. Adding Padme into the New Republic era, I feel like gave such an interesting perspective on this era, and I learned a lot from making this video, which is why it was so fun for me to write. It's really interesting how the New Republic has all this potential, but it was really crippled by Imperial era politicians, people that were complacent under Palpatine because they had no power, and they just kind of took whatever power they could in the rise of the New Republic. It does, in theory, make sense why the New Republic wanted to demilitarize. I think having the outsider's perspective, which Padme had, would be the reason for them to militarize. I think so much of what was talked about between the rise of the centrist movement is why the New Republic crippled so fast after the Hosnian cataclysm, and so that was really fun to kind of explore this story, adding a more militaristic effect for the New Republic, making it big enough to scare the First Order away, and big enough to actually compete against the Final Order on a galactic scale instead of just on Exegol. So I hope y'all enjoyed this much different political New Republic story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.